The turkey had been on the table for 20 minutes before I noticed the smell. Not the warm, herb-roasted scent my mother-in-law always described in her Facebook posts about her legendary Thanksgiving stuffing. Something underneath it, earthy and rich in a way that made the back of my throat tighten before I'd taken a single bite. I told myself it was nothing. I had spent 3 years telling myself it was nothing. "You're not eating," my husband said beside me, already loading his plate for the second time. He said it the way he always said things like that, not as a question, not out of concern, but as an observation designed to draw attention to me. "A setup. The stuffing," I said quietly, leaning toward him. "Did your mother use the same recipe?" He rolled his eyes in that slow, theatrical way he'd perfected. Here we go. My mother-in-law, from across the table, had already heard. She had always been able to hear anything that might require her to be offended. "I made it exactly the same as always, sweetheart. It's my grandmother's recipe. I just want to make sure. Does it have any tree nuts? You know I have a severe allergy." The table got quiet in the particular way it always got quiet when I brought up my allergy. Not the silence of concern. The silence of people suppressing sighs. "There's a tiny bit of walnut in the herb blend," she said, already turning back to my father-in-law. "But it's such a small amount, honestly. I've been making this recipe for 35 years. I put my fork down. "I can't eat it, then. I'm sorry. I'll just have the potatoes and the green beans." 35 years, my husband muttered under his breath, and his sister across the table pressed her lips together to hide a smile. This was the performance they had refined over 3 years of our marriage. I was the difficult one, the dramatic one, the woman who turned every holiday into a production about herself and her allergy. My husband had told his family, early on, that I had a tendency to catastrophize, that I'd been evaluated for anxiety, that my allergy, while real, was something I used as a social crutch when I wanted to avoid situations. He'd told me this himself once, in the car on the way home from his parents' house, matter-of-factly, the way you'd explain something to a child who doesn't understand why she can't have dessert. I had been formally diagnosed with a severe tree nut allergy at age 8. I had been hospitalized twice before I was 12. I carried 2 EpiPens everywhere I went. My allergy was not a personality trait. It was a documented, life-threatening medical condition. But in 3 years of marriage, I had learned that facts had very little power in that house. I ate the potatoes. I ate the green beans. I drank 2 glasses of water and tried to ignore the tightening in my throat that I kept telling myself was stress, was psychosomatic, was me catastrophizing. Just like they always said. By the time my mother-in-law was cutting the pumpkin pie, I couldn't breathe right. Not dramatically. Not the way it happens in movies, sudden and violent. It started as a kind of thickness in my chest, like someone had wrapped a band around my lungs and was slowly pulling it tighter. My lips felt strange. I reached up and touched them, and my fingertips registered puffiness that my brain took a moment to process. "I think I'm having a reaction," I said. My husband looked at me, then at his plate, then back at me. "Your EpiPen is in your purse." "I know where it is." I was already pushing back from the table. "I think I need it." "You always think you need it." He said it with a little laugh, looking at his sister. Last Christmas, she was convinced she was going into anaphylaxis from the pecan pie. Remember? Turned out she just had a cold. His sister laughed. My mother-in-law made that specific sound she made, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. Something designed to communicate fond exasperation with me. I stood up and my legs were wrong. They were there. I could feel them. But something about the connection between my brain and my body had gone soft and unreliable. I grabbed the back of my chair. "My purse," I said. "I need my purse." "It's in the hallway," my husband said, not moving. My father-in-law watched me from across the table with that careful blankness he wore when he didn't want to be involved in whatever I was doing. I made it 3 steps toward the hallway before my vision went white at the edges and I went down. I didn't fall dramatically. I sort of folded, my knees going first, then my hands hitting the hardwood floor, and then I was on my side, looking at the legs of the dining room chairs and the dust ruffle of the tablecloth, and I could hear my own heartbeat in a way that was wrong. Rapid and thin and wrong. Okay. My husband's voice. Above me, annoyed. "Get up, sweetheart. You're scaring my mom." I couldn't answer him. My throat had closed down to something the width of a coffee stirrer, and breathing through it required every bit of concentration I had. She's not getting up. My sister-in-law's voice. Different now. Less certain. She does this. My mother-in-law, from somewhere. She did the exact same thing at Easter, and it turned out to be nothing. She just needs some air. I heard the front door open. Cold November air moved across the floor near my face. My husband, I realized, had opened the door to give me air rather than get my EpiPen, which was 9 feet away in the hallway. Then there were different footsteps. Faster. Someone kneeling on the floor beside me. Oh no, 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 no. A woman's voice. My neighbor from 2 doors down. She'd mentioned at Halloween that she was spending Thanksgiving with her parents, who lived on this same street. She'd apparently been walking back to their house when she saw my husband open the front door. Her lips are blue. Does she have an EpiPen? Tell me she has an EpiPen. She always overreacts to my husband started. Her lips are blue. My neighbor's voice was flat and hard and left no room for discussion. Where is her EpiPen? Right now. Her purse. In the hallway. She was already moving. I heard her find it, the familiar clink of the case, and then she was back beside me, and she knew exactly what she was doing. The cap, the press against my outer thigh, the click, and within seconds the concrete band around my chest, loosened by 1 degree. Call 911, she said. Now. I'm not asking. This is so unnecessary, my mother-in-law said. My neighbor looked up. I couldn't see her face, but I could hear what happened to her voice. Ma'am, your daughter-in-law is in anaphylactic shock. If I hadn't walked by, she would be dead in the next 4 minutes. Call 911. Now. Someone called. I lay on the floor and concentrated on the small amount of air I was able to move through my throat and listen to my husband tell the paramedics, when they arrived, that I had a history of anxiety and that I had been evaluated for hypochondria, and that while my allergy was real, I had a tendency to over-trigger myself through stress. He said it with complete confidence, with the fluency of someone who had rehearsed it many times, who had perhaps said it to doctors before. The paramedic, a young man with careful hands, looked at my lips, looked at my throat, looked at the EpiPen my neighbor was still holding. Then he looked at my husband and said, with professional neutrality, Sir, your wife is in anaphylactic shock. Please step back. They took me in the ambulance. My neighbor rode with me. My husband followed in his car. When I could speak, somewhere on the highway with an oxygen mask on my face and my neighbor's hand around my wrist, taking my pulse the way nurses do automatically, even when off duty, I said, Thank you. Don't thank me yet, she said. We need to figure out what happened. At the hospital, there were 2 doctors. The ER physician was a woman with close-cropped hair who moved efficiently and asked me questions while she worked. And she brought in an allergist, a man with the specific manner of someone who has spent years being consulted in emergencies. They stabilized me first. Then, they asked me questions. The allergist sat beside my bed and looked at my chart, and then he looked at me in a particular way, a way I would later understand, meant that he had seen something that did not fit the expected pattern. I want to run some additional blood work, he said. Not just the standard allergy panel. I want a broader inflammatory marker test and cardiac enzymes. Is something wrong? I asked. He was quiet for a moment. I want to understand what I'm seeing. Your response to the EpiPen, you responded, but not as cleanly as I'd expect for a first anaphylactic event. Your throat inflammation is significant, but your cardiac indicators are concerning to me in a way that usually indicates prior stress to the system. My husband, who had arrived and was sitting in the corner of the room looking at his phone, said, She had a similar episode at Christmas last year. At Easter. She's had a few small ones. The allergist turned to look at him. She's had anaphylactic episodes before. Small ones, my husband said. She's very sensitive. She's always fine. Did she receive epinephrine at these previous episodes? She didn't need it. She calmed down on her own. The allergist wrote something in his notes and didn't say anything else. The results came back the next morning. The allergist came in with the ER physician, and they both sat down. And that's how I knew. When there's 2 of them, and they sit down, there is something they need to tell you slowly. Your blood work shows something we need to discuss, the allergist said. Your cardiac enzyme levels suggest you've had repeated significant cardiac stress, the kind of stress the heart undergoes during anaphylaxis when it's working without adequate epinephrine to support it. This isn't from last night alone. I stared at him. The inflammatory markers in your system, combined with specific antibody levels, he continued. Paint a picture of someone who has experienced multiple severe allergic events over an extended period. Not small reactions. Severe ones. The tissue damage in your throat is also consistent with repeated significant swelling and recovery. I've had some reactions, I said slowly. My husband always said they weren't serious. They were serious, the ER physician said. The Christmas episode your husband described. The Easter one. If those were true anaphylactic events, and the evidence in your blood work suggests they were, you should have received epinephrine and emergency care each time. She paused. Did you ever lose consciousness during those episodes? I thought about Christmas. The floor of the hallway. My husband's voice telling me to breathe, telling me I was fine, telling me I just needed water. How I'd woken up on the couch an hour later with a headache and my mother-in-law saying I'd gotten everyone worried for nothing. Yes, I said. The physician exchanged a look with the allergist. We're required to report this, she said. Not to alarm you, but what the medical evidence shows repeated severe anaphylactic events without treatment that constitutes a pattern of medical neglect. Given that your husband was present at these events and chose not to call for emergency care, we have an obligation to involve law enforcement. My husband, from the corner, looked up from his phone. That's ridiculous, he said. She was fine every time. You can't call neglect because someone didn't call 911 over a little throat tightness. Sir, the allergist said quietly, your wife has permanent myocardial scarring, consistent with 3 to 5 episodes of prolonged anaphylaxis without epinephrine. Last night, if your neighbor had not intervened, the outcome would very likely have been fatal. The room was very quiet. She's dramatic, my husband said. She's always been dramatic. You don't know her like I do. We know what her blood work says, the physician said. And she left the room to make a phone call that would change everything. The detective who came was a woman in her late 40s with reading glasses pushed up on her head and a yellow legal pad. She sat with me for a long time, and she asked me questions, and she was the first person in 3 years who wrote down everything I said without suggesting an alternative explanation for it. She asked me about Christmas, about Easter, about a birthday dinner in February when I'd felt wrong for hours and my husband had given me Benadryl and told me to sleep it off, about all the times I had told him something was wrong and he had used the word dramatic, the word catastrophize, the word anxiety, until I had started to use those words about myself. Did he know about your allergy when you married him? She asked. Yes, I said. He was with me when I was diagnosed as an adult. We were dating. He drove me to the appointment. She wrote that down. Then she asked if she could look at my phone. Not to take it, just to look, with my permission. I said yes. She scrolled through my text history with my husband. She didn't show me what she found, but I watched her expression change. Later, my neighbor told me what the detective had shared with her. There were texts between my husband and his mother, going back 18 months, in which they discussed my allergy in terms that were not compatible with concern. Texts in which my husband described my episodes as performances. Texts in which his mother said she couldn't believe I had everyone fooled. Texts in which they had planned the Thanksgiving menu knowing what it contained and had not told me. His mother had not forgotten about the walnuts. My husband was arrested 2 days after Thanksgiving. The charge was criminal, reckless endangerment, a felony in our state. Given the documented medical evidence of repeated harm, his mother was charged as a co-conspirator. The texts were evidence. The blood work was evidence. My neighbor's witness statement was evidence. The hospital's documentation of my cardiac scarring was evidence. 3 years of him telling every doctor, every family member, every holiday table that I was dramatic, that I catastrophized, that my allergy was a personality defect. 3 years of that could not undo what was written in my own blood and tissue. My attorney filed a civil lawsuit simultaneously. This was something the detective mentioned was an option, and something I want to be direct about, because no one tells you this part. The criminal case matters, but the civil case is where accountability becomes concrete. My husband's family had money. They had a house. They had assets. The civil suit named my husband, his mother, and the family trust, and it sought damages for medical expenses, lost wages from the months I'd spent functioning below capacity from untreated, repeated anaphylaxis, pain and suffering, and punitive damages given the deliberate nature of the harm. My neighbor testified. The allergist testified. My husband's defense attorney tried to argue that I was a suggestible woman with health anxiety who had created her own medical reality. But you cannot argue with cardiac enzyme levels. You cannot argue with myocardial scarring. You cannot argue with texts between a husband and his mother discussing how to handle what they called her allergy theatrics while planning a menu they knew contained her allergen. The criminal trial took 4 months. My husband received 4 years. His mother received 2 years and was ordered to complete community service in a medical setting so that she might understand what she had participated in. The civil judgment was awarded in my favor enough to cover every medical bill, 2 years of lost wages, ongoing cardiac monitoring, and a punitive amount that my attorney described as the court making a point. The judge, before she read the sentence, said something I wrote down and have kept. She said that dismissing someone's documented medical need is not a personality conflict. It is not a marital disagreement. When the dismissal is repeated and knowing and results in measurable physical harm, it is a crime. She said that the word dramatic had been used in this courtroom to describe a woman whose heart shows the physical evidence of being repeatedly denied life-saving care, and that the court found that word choice revealing. I want to tell you about my neighbor, because without her, none of the rest of it happens. She was not looking for anything that night. She was walking back from her parents' house after Thanksgiving dinner, a container of leftover sweet potato pie in her hand, and she saw a front door open in November, and something made her look. She is an ER nurse. She has told me since that the moment she saw me on the floor and saw my lips, her training overrode every social hesitation. She said she's learned, in 15 years of emergency nursing, that the people around a victim in a medical emergency will almost always defer to the loudest, most confident voice in the room, and that the loudest, most confident voice is not always right. She checks on me every week. She brought soup when I was recovering. She sat with me through 2 of the hardest nights before the trial. She told me once, late, over wine I had verified was safe, that she went home after that Thanksgiving night and could not sleep because she kept thinking about what would have happened if she had taken a different route. I don't let myself think about that for too long. It's been 2 years. My heart requires monitoring, the scarring is permanent, and I will see a cardiologist annually for the rest of my life. I carry 3 EpiPens now instead of 2. And I have a medical alert bracelet, and I have a new rule that I will not eat food I have not personally verified at any gathering, ever, for any reason, regardless of who makes me feel dramatic for asking. I don't feel dramatic anymore. I work with a patient advocacy organization now, specifically in the area of allergy management and medical dismissal. You would be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't, how many people come to us with stories of being called difficult, hysterical, overly sensitive about documented medical conditions. How many of them have stopped carrying their EpiPens because someone important to them convinced them it was embarrassing? How many of them have sat at tables and eaten food that was wrong for them because the alternative was being called dramatic one more time? I speak at hospitals and I speak at nursing schools, and I say the same thing every time. The word dramatic is not a diagnosis. When someone tells you they are hurt, when someone tells you something is wrong in their own body, the correct response is not to explain to them why they are mistaken. The correct response is to believe them until the evidence tells you otherwise, and then to look very carefully at that evidence. My ex-husband sent a letter from prison through his attorney, not to me personally, but to my attorney, suggesting that I consider the toll this had taken on his family and whether there was any path towards some kind of reconciliation. My attorney sent back a 1-line response. I have rebuilt my life in ways I could not have imagined when I was the woman sitting at a Thanksgiving table telling herself the tightness in her throat was probably just stress. I have an apartment I chose. I have a calendar full of things I agreed to. I have friends who, when I say something feels wrong, say, "Tell me more," not, "Here you go again." The toxicology report from that November night. The cardiac imaging. The inflammatory marker panel. The text between my husband and his mother. All of it is part of my medical and legal file, and I have copies of everything. And I kept them not because I need to look at them, but because there are days when the voice trained into me over 3 years of marriage says maybe you were being too sensitive, maybe it wasn't that serious, maybe you ruined a family over something you should have just walked off. On those days, I look at the imaging of my heart. I look at the report that says the scarring is consistent with 3 to 5 severe anaphylactic events without treatment. I look at the words on the page that have no opinion about how sensitive I am, that do not know what dramatic means, that only record what happened to my body when no one in the room would listen. The truth does not require you to be believed to exist. It only requires time. I had to almost die to prove mine. But I'm here now. And I will keep saying it. At every hospital, every conference, every room full of nurses and doctors, and anyone who will listen. When someone tells you they are hurt, believe them. Don't make them prove it with the evidence written in their own blood. No one should have to do that. No one should have to survive the proof.